All right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know who needs to hear this, but JJ McCarthy, I think, is a good quarterback. All right, the Minnesota Vikings, when JJ McCarthy started a football game for them last season, they went 6-4. That blew my mind away. I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, okay, but I do have a super soft spot for every NFC North team, especially the Minnesota Vikings and especially the Detroit Lions. And as much as I hate them, the Chicago Bears, I'm also from Chicago, but I'm born and raised living in Chicago watching NFC North football. That's just my entire life. So I'll always talk Vikings, Lions, Bears, Packers. Minnesota, I kind of stopped watching the Viking season after the Packers loss. Essentially, JJ McCarthy, I can pull it up, went 12 of 19 for 87 yards, and the Vikings lost 23-6, okay? The Vikings proceeded to win their next 5 games, okay? So with that 23-6 loss to my Green Bay Packers, the Vikings fell to 4-8. Yep, 4-8. So they were effectively eliminated from the playoffs. So I stopped watching live Minnesota Vikings football because I wasn't going to cover them on Sunday, so I'm not going to watch them live. As a result, kind of just, didn't really watch too much Vikings football. Like Christmas Day, we're watching Max, and, it's just like, this isn't Vikings football, I know. So it's easy, what I'm saying, to fall under the assumption of what social media is saying that JJ McCarthy is a bad quarterback. Folks, I went back and I watched so much Vikings, so much JJ from this past 2025. And first off, that was what really blew me away, was that he was 6-4 as a starter for the Minnesota Vikings, and this team got treated like they were complete and utter dog water. Here's another fun fact. First off, Brian Flores is back. That's not the fact, but it is it is a fact. The Minnesota Vikings last season were the 25th oldest team in the NFL. Okay? What does that mean? Well, it can mean a couple of different things, but one thing I noticed was the Minnesota Vikings cap situation is not good. It's like minus 40 whatever million dollars. They don't really have any free agents. Like, I think Eric Wilson was one of the free agents that I noticed, but they don't really have too many free agents. So, what I'm trying to get at here is typically rookie quarterbacks look like rookie quarterbacks. And as much as people hate when I say it, JJ McCarthy last year was a rookie quarterback. So, you've got the coach, you've got the play caller, and Kevin O'Connell. There's plenty of weapons offensively, no matter what ends up happening. Personally, I don't think TJ Hawkinson is a member of the Minnesota Vikings next season. I think they can save a bunch of money on the cap, and he's getting old. The production has dropped off a cliff. They can get better and cheaper at that position. I don't think TJ Hawkinson's going to be a member of the team. Aaron Jones is 31. Aaron Jones coming off an injury-riddled season. I don't think TJ will be here. Whether or not Aaron Jones is back, it just doesn't matter. There's plenty of weapons on offense. What I noticed also watching back the Vikings game was that week 1 game against the Chicago Bears was unbelievable. JJ McCarthy was unbelievable. And I noticed game 2, week 2, was against the Atlanta Falcons, which was a primetime football game, Sunday Night Football. And then the next game, he got injured, comes back like 2 weeks later and actually beats the Detroit Lions, throws 2 touchdowns, only 1 interception, 143 yards, but he ran for a touchdown. I just watched it. It was a really riveting game. He had a bunch of great throws, bunch of great runs. I'm sure Vikings fans, you guys remember that like week 4 or 5, week 4 matchup against the Detroit Lions. There was so much good. But week 1, fourth quarter, 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, they come back and win 27-24 in Chicago, and the Bears end up winning the division. Insanely impressive comeback, insanely impressive fourth quarter. And so I noticed in particularly like that Lions game when he came out in the first quarter was just slinging it. He wasn't thinking. They weren't playing from behind. He was just slinging the football. Okay, I go back, I watched the final 4 games, or 4 of his final 5 games, because the Lions Christmas game was meshed in there. But the Packers, whatever, I get it. My Packers were resting starters, Giants, whatever. There's games like that Dallas game and that Washington game at the end of the season after the Packers lost and after he came back from injury, where the Vikings were effectively eliminated from the playoffs. Nobody really cared about JJ McCarthy anymore because the Vikings were 4-8. They were 5-8. All right, rookie QB, Darnold's in Seattle. They're, going to make the playoffs. They look really good. Like, people just kind of forgot about Minnesota, right? It happens to like half of the teams in the NFL when, we're about to get into the playoffs. So my point just here is, you know, you check the NFL media world, you check Twitter, TV, articles, and they're giving you all this negative press to JJ McCarthy. I urge you, and there's some really bad. There is some really bad. Like, some of these interceptions are really bad. Some of these missed touchdowns are bad. Fumbles, interceptions, completion percent, sacks. I mean, there were a couple of games in here, like week 2, we got sacked 6 times. Detroit game, he got sacked 5 times. Packers game, he got sacked 5 times. Washington game, even though he had 3 touchdowns, he got sacked 4 times. The sacks were way too high. He had a negative ratio, bro. 11 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. And you know what it actually reminds me a little bit of is Josh Allen, because Josh Allen, it was like a similar but different Bills situation. Like, Josh Allen, it took him till like the real end of his rookie season to, statistically see something there. And then obviously the rest is history. It's also important to keep in mind JJ McCarthy was the youngest starting quarterback in the NFL last year. He was the youngest quarterback in the NFL last year. So I get it. The Vikings didn't look like the Minnesota Vikings. And even their defense. I like looked back and, Vikings were a top defense across the board, or at least above average defense. And, they were like second in passing yards. They were a top 10 rush defense. Maybe the sacks and the takeaways weren't there like they were last season. And I do anticipate Brian Flores and Kevin O'Connell to kind of revamp particular aspects. Like I told you, they were the 5th oldest or, 25th in age last season. So 7th oldest team in the NFL. You've maybe got some injury-prone guys. You've got some guys on the last year of their contracts, or just need a change of scenery. I expect a revamp, both offensively and defensively. Not even maybe similar to a retool, but this Vikings team's talented, and it's shown by the 9-8 record. I've always loved the adage of, like, you are what your record is. And the Minnesota Vikings were 9-8. And what does that tell me? When I put in the context, it was a very inconsistent, unreliable team because they had a rookie quarterback playing. And, injuries, like, was the offensive line ever healthy? I mean, like, I should have Googled how many snaps that starting 5 played together last year. It felt like maybe a couple of quarters together. Maybe by the end of the season they were fully healthy, but it felt like every single time you would watch the Vikings in the first half of the season, it was like, oh, here's 2 new players on their offensive line that are missing, and here's 2 guys that were missing for the last 2 weeks, but now they're back, but now their other 2 guys are hurt. And so injuries, I've seen some Vikings fans complain about, like, stubborn play calling. I don't know the legitimacy of it. I think that's just Kevin O'Connell. You look at, like, JJ's completion percent, 57.6. Once again, 11 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He had, 163 throwing yards, passing yards per game. I've seen some play calling stuff for KOC, and there have been numerous times where I've even pulled it up on film over on Will Upton, where we're looking at some Vikings passing concepts, and it's not like the easiest. There's no, like, underneath clear-cut guy on every single play for JJ to just throw the ball to. There's not always a halfback 5 yards in the flat, wide open, that's going to run for an extra 5. Like, you need to get it either simplified for JJ, or I'm not an offensive coordinator, I guess is the point. But my point is, I've seen a lot of Vikings fans complaining about play calling. I have noticed some things on Kevin O'Connell's play calling, looking back at some Vikings film from last season. Whether that results in more underneath stuff, having a different tight end, whatever it is, the Vikings offense will be more efficient next season, and JJ's only going to get better. That should be the worst of whatever you want to look at. Awareness, pocket presence, throwing with anticipation, going off the run, not taking sacks, you name it. Hike to throw. I can't think of the goddamn metric for that, but hike and throw, pass throw time. Can't think of the abbreviation, but you get the point here. It should be the lowest you've seen from JJ, and that's just the point of this video is That should have been the lowest. It should only get better from here, even if he's a game manager. Take a look at the two quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. I had this kind of feeling watching some of the JJ clips from his rookie season or from this past season. It kind of reminded me of like a little bit more mobile Brock Purdy. Maybe he's got a worse arm in some areas than Brock Purdy, but he's got better legs than Brock. Just real good system. Brock's a real good system QB with Shanahan, and I just feel like KOC and the Vikings will have that next season. I've always played around with this, and I feel like it depends on who you ask. There are a lot of like football dudes who will tell you that an offensive play caller is more important than the quarterback. So I'll just leave that out there. I don't really have a take on that, but I'm just going to throw that out there. So that's really it. With that comment being said, because it was a little ambiguous, of your play caller is more important than your quarterback. Take a look at just go watch JJ's last 4 games of the season. Here, just off the top of the head, completion percent, here's a 4-game span from right before the 5-game winning streak. 52.4%, 56%, 47.6%, and 50% in the second game against the Bears. We go to JJ's completion percent in his final 5 starts. 63.2, 69.6, 62.5, 64.3, 60.9. Huge, like almost went from like 50% to 60+% in the second half of the season. Something to keep an eye on. Vikings-wise, probably save that for a little bit. We talked, enough Vikings in this video, but I do anticipate them to get younger, whatever that entails. And then the draft has just been, we talked about your GM getting fired a couple of days ago. We talked about Brian Flores getting rehired a couple of weeks ago. So we're posting a ton of Vikings content, and we'll continue that up. So thank you for watching. Hit that like button, hit that sub button. As always, we're trying to get 200 subscribers by the end of February. Let me know your thoughts on JJ McCarthy, and if you've got some free time from, here until next September, go watch some JJ McCarthy film, some full games, even some highlights. Go watch that Vikings-Bears game. The dude looks way better than if you had never seen him played and just opened on Twitter and saw all the 9 memes. So thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Goodbye.